Blog Talk Radio.
You are now listening to True Murder, the most shocking killers in true crime history, and the authors that have written about them. Gacy, Bundy, Dahmer, The Night Stalker, BTK. Every week, another fascinating author talking about the most shocking and infamous killers in true crime history. True Murder, with your host, journalist and author, Dan Zupansky.
Good evening. Dayton Leroy Rogers was known in Portland, Oregon as a respected businessman and devoted husband and father. But at night he abducted women, forced them into sadistic bondage games, and thrilled in their pain, terror, and mutilation. His murderous spree was stopped only after in plain view he slashed to death his final victim. And when a hunter accidentally stumbled onto the burial grounds of 7 other women Rogers had killed one by one in the depths of the Molalla Forest, police realized they were dealing with a serial killer whose bloodlust knew no bounds. This is the shocking true story of the horrifying crimes, capture, and conviction of Dayton Leroy Rogers, Oregon's mild-mannered businessman by day, vicious serial killer by night. The book that we're profiling this evening is Bloodlust, Portrait of a Serial Sex Killer, with my special guest, journalist and author, Gary C.King. Welcome back to the program, and thank you for agreeing to this interview, Gary C.King.
Thanks, Dan. It's good to be back. I like your show a lot.
Well, it's great to have you back, so that works out good for everyone, including our esteemed audience. So now, as we spoke before, just before the program here, this is a book that came out 20 years ago. So tell us now this true crime classic, Bloodlust. Tell us exactly, without giving anything really too much away, how it came to be that you wrote this book, Bloodlust. Was it your idea, the publisher's idea? How did you come to this? How did it come to your attention? Tell us just a little bit about how you came to write Bloodlust.
Well, at that time in my writing career, I was still writing for the detective magazines, and I wanted very much to break out from that and explore books. This was my first book, and
wow.
Therefore it was my choice to write about this particular case. There were a lot of women at the time going missing, and there was a true mystery going on as what was happening to Portland's prostitutes. They were just disappearing. And I thought, well, this looks like a really good possibility because it sure seems like there's a serial killer at work here. And so I followed it. I just followed the story for a long time. And as time went on, the case, of course, became more and more interesting as the cops, in fact, determined that there was a serial killer, and they began developing the case. But it turned out that it was my idea, it was my choice to write about it, and I had lots of cooperation from the cops in this case, which we can get into, and I can tell you about if you're interested.
Absolutely.
But that's how it got started, and then came the famous 160-page proposal. I never had written a book proposal before, and the book proposal was half the length of the book. But my agent put it up for auction, and Michaela Hamilton at that time at Penguin Books decided she wanted it for their New American Library imprint, and so she snapped it up. I worked with her for the next 6 months or so in developing the rest of it into a book.
And she went on to Kensington Press, and that's more on the story.
Yeah, she is. She's actually been over there for years now.
Yeah.
I'm very happy there with her true crime division.
Absolutely. Now, tell us a little bit about I thought this was very fascinating, too. To put it in perspective, very much like Canada, the U.S. is even more known for, it seems to be one of the coasts, even more evidence of serial killers on the West Coast for some reason. And Oregon and that area, Portland, Washington. Anyway, tell us a little bit about the history of some of the famous and not so famous serial killers from this area. Tell us about Brudos and up to the Green River Killer, which I thought was very interesting.
Yeah, we know that that the Pacific Northwest, particularly the Seattle area, was the stomping grounds of Ted Bundy, and that went on for a long time. And of course, there was Jerome Brudos. He operated out of Oregon and was not as big or well known as some of the other serial killers, but just as vicious and savage as they were. He liked to, collect trophies like breasts and feet and things like that. But he was, fairly big in the news when these things were coming out. But then we've got, people like Wesley Allen Dodd came from that area. He was headline news for ages, child killer, pedophile. Yeah. And then the I-5 killer, Randall Woodfield, probably less well known, but nonetheless an interesting character from that area. And then the mystery of the Green River Killer, that went on for God, how many decades it seemed like before where they found Gary Ridgway.
Yeah. What I found interesting in your book is that obviously if people had bought the book 20 years ago, the Green River Killer was not identified at that time.
That's true, yeah. I allude to him a few times in the opening passages because he was still out there operating at the time. And there were times when people thought that Rogers may have been somehow linked to that case, but, of course, that was history. Turned out not to be the situation. Now,
in the subject of this story, or the location of this story, is Portland, Oregon, and we have this. You paint again very vivid portrayal of this area and the people that inhabit it. This 82nd Avenue, and to get the rationale why these people would operate not downtown, but more so in this area, and then you introduce the character Tracy Baxter. Tell us about Portland, Oregon at that time in the late 80s, and this area specifically, and take us back and paint a portrait of this very different slice of life at that time.
Well, as you know, in any major city, there's always going to be pockets of prostitution in a particular area. Sure. And in Portland, for instance, Northeast Union Avenue was well known for prostitution. And in fact, it was so well known that the residents there often referred to it as Prostitute Row. But it wasn't the only area. There were parts of Southeast Union Avenue, going all the way out to the Milwaukee, Oregon area. And, of course, 82nd Avenue, perhaps because of its proximity to the airport. I don't know for sure, but it seems reasonable. Plus, it's a busy boulevard, plenty of opportunity for hookers and johns to do their work, make their connections. But those were the main areas at that time. I've been away from there for quite a while, so I don't know what's going on up there right now. But 82nd Avenue, Southeast 82nd Avenue, was probably just as popular for prostitution and john activity as was Northeast Portland.
Now, you introduced this very crucial character in this story, and the amazing access you have to this story is really the gift of this book, because it explains how on earth this could actually happen. Because without this information, it's you have a lot more questions than answers, and this really takes you to the heart of the matter. Now, you introduced this Tracy Baxter, barely 16, young, petite, good-looking, fit, with a boyfriend that, is her pimp/boyfriend. Introduced Tracy Baxter and her pimp boyfriend and sort of the rationale for what she's doing at this time in her life.
And your question is?
Well, just tell us about what she was doing at this age doing this. I mean, obviously you explained how the boyfriend explains that we need some money, honey, and so. But that's how you introduced the character of Tracy Baxter.
She was, just a typical teenager, skipping school or not going to school or whatever the case may be. The situation was simply that she needed money, and this was a quick way for her to turn a buck. And a lot of other girls got into the same situation as Tracy, which is not her real name. But it's just the youthful age of the girls would seem to be a recurring pattern. Rogers seemed to like them young when he could get them, at that age. But oftentimes he had to settle, for older women, the more mature prostitutes. But most of them were supporting drug habits. Many of them were supporting the drug habits of their pimps/boyfriends. And that was a recurring theme over and over. It was just life on the streets of Portland, or any other major city for that matter, where you have this kind of activity. And it makes people like Tracy, a perfect right victim for people like Rogers. I mean, they're out there, they're in the open, they're taking risks that they probably know that they shouldn't be taking. And, of course, people like Dayton Rogers, knew this. So, easy victim for someone like Rogers.
What I found very interesting was the pimp, the boyfriend, and her mission was to go out on the streets and make enough money, she said, for a couple days worth of motel, food, crack cocaine, and alcohol. And so, $400 or $500. And so you even described basically around because she was 16, because she was good looking, sometimes she would make $80, but on this particular night that she's hitchhiking, it's raining. Now, what I found most interesting is that she had been warned about, this blue, she had a description of the vehicle of a guy that maybe you can tell us what that description was, that warning was. And then also what I found interesting was that you point out that maybe the reason why the boyfriend said that they should go to 82nd Avenue was because the real freaks, the enema guys, the bestiality guys, the torture guys, I couldn't believe this, were actually more known to be those kinds of clients downtown. Tell us a little bit more about this.
Well, naturally, they couldn't see more than 2 or 3 days into their futures, and that accounts for a lot of their thinking. They're mainly just thinking about getting by for the next day or two, and
right.
That includes their drug and alcohol habits. But you're right. There were certain areas where certain types of Johns, for lack of a better word, would frequent. And while I may not know them off the top of my head, my research into the book showed me that many of the prostitutes working these various areas knew at least a little bit about the kinds of guys who frequented a certain area, such as the enema freak or the bondage freak or the violent ones. And at this particular time, and I think this is what you might have been referring to, is there were warnings out to the girls among themselves and among others, just people on the street, to watch out for this man named Steve the Gambler, and he drove a little blue Nissan pickup, and he had been known to be violent with his dates, and so the warnings were out there, but yet people the women, they kept taking the chances, I suppose out of desperation. I mean, you and I, it's harder for us to fathom what would drive people to go to these lengths or to take such risks, but, you know, it's a well-documented fact that they do, and it's sad. But,
what I found fascinating was that they had give a good description of the vehicle pretty well, because when Tracy actually did see it, she at least recognized that memory of, okay, here's a description of that vehicle from this kind of guy. And then the description of the guy, but didn't anybody give her a physical description of the guy? I thought that was odd.
There weren't the physical descriptions that were going around in the early days, which would have included when Tracy had her encounter with Rogers. They were very limited descriptions. They were very vague, very general. They knew they were looking for a white guy, seemed, reasonable, seemed to have manners, soft-spoken sort of individual. But that's about all they really had to go on, blondish brown hair, this sort of thing. Now, if somebody had come forward and said, hey, he kind of looked a little bit like John Ritter, that would have helped immensely, especially at that stage of Dayton's life, because there is a resemblance there. But nobody did that, unfortunately.
There was one particular, other than I'll give it away, bondage. But there was one other particular fetish that was quite unique that becomes important a little bit later.
Yeah.
That was the feet. The feet.
Oh yeah, the feet were
foot fetish.
Paramount. I mean, it was always the feet with him.
Yeah.
I don't know how much you want to get into that here, but it was.
Well, we will eventually. Yeah.
Yeah.
We will eventually.
Yeah, his fetish was just unbelievable. I had never encountered.
What I found interesting was that this Tracy, though, at 16 years old, was actually warned that he sometimes liked to get violent, like you said, but he also liked knives and often cut his dates. And when we're talking about desperate, even I am kind of shocked at this, that really people were warned like that and still took a chance. I mean, even I'm surprised.
I think, me too, but I think it really boils down to this it'll never happen to me syndrome, sort of thing. They know it's out there, they hear about it, they see it, but it's not going to happen to me. It'll happen to the other person. I really believe it has a major part in it.
Yeah, and you explain that too. Now tell us about. Go back to this amazing event with Tracy hitchhiking. It's March. It's a little bit cold. It's rainy. She's dressed real scantily, so she's not got too much clothing, and she's just been out for 10 minutes or so, and she has a sort of a mindset. Take us back where you take the reader to what she's doing and what happens that evening.
Well, she's out, exposed to the March weather for one thing, and in the Pacific Northwest, that's not, very, very nice weather.
No.
And she was out showing her skin, and the passion pink anklets, if I remember correctly, and she was basically out showing off her wares to try to attract some business. And the best way she knew how was to dress that way and to, act as young as possible and see how many people she could attract, how many guys, from the street.
Sure.
And it was just a typical night for her. Probably a pretty typical night for Dayton, too, as far as that goes. But anyway, that's what she was doing. She was just out working the streets, and she liked to hang around a hamburger joint out there too, Bob's Big Boy restaurant. I don't think there are too many of those around anymore. But anyway, I don't know how much you want me to get into that. I mean, I think that that pretty much covers what she was doing to set up her evening. She just wanted to make sure that they had the money, her and her boyfriend, to take care of their drugs and alcohol in a room for a while, and at one point, Steve the gambler pulled up
in his blue pickup truck.
Yeah, and he had a likable face. He was, like I said before, he was soft-spoken, kind of mild-mannered personality until he, worked himself into one of his frenzies, and then that was a different matter. But she must have trusted him, because she certainly, got into the truck with him. And then when she did that, of course, it was all downhill until she managed to get away.
Now, let's not skip over that, because that tells us a lot about what happened to the people that didn't get away, because we'll never be able to tell that story. So the thing is with him, what you'd said in the book was that she noticed the blue truck and it fit the description, but again, it might not be. She rationalized because she needed the money. She didn't want to be out that long. Again, just not thinking too far ahead. She was barely 16 years old. So he seemed to be normal, good-looking, soft-spoken, like you said. He got into the vehicle. How did this date proceed?
Well, they rode along for a while. I think they discussed, the date at one point, and probably arrived at a price. And I think his quietness eventually began to bother her. But nonetheless, she stuck with it for a while, and again, she's not believing that something's, bad, is about to happen to her. But then he very bluntly, at one point, told her that he wanted to see her feet. He wanted to look at her feet. And, she's thinking that it's a strange request when he, tells her that she needs to take off her shoes. But she did, what she was told, and she was paying attention to him, noticing that he was getting, aroused by what she was doing, and it was the nature of the business. So, the date goes on, and he pushes his trademark drink of orange juice and vodka, typical screwdriver on her, because it's easy to carry, easy to mix, easy to dispose of, because he used the little airline-type bottles of vodka and the type of orange juice purchased at a 7-Eleven or the other convenience store. And he used the alcohol, I think, as much to make himself relax more, as much as he did to try and loosen up, the girls. But like I said, I don't know if I should have said it was his trademark, because that's kind of revealing. But yeah, I've said it, so there, it's done.
Yeah.
You know.
Now she has her doubts when first with the vehicle a little bit, then when he talks about the feet, but then he sort of seems to be, he doesn't proceed to anything violent, it seems. He wants to drink some alcohol. Then he negotiates with her that he says, listen, I only got $40 and some alcohol. And right away, she's not even used to making that much money. She agrees to it. Now, what is his idea, and how do they get to Molalla? So how does this date go that what happens?
Well, the southeast part of the city where they're at, off of the 82nd, is kind of heading in that direction anyway, towards the Molalla Forest. They're in the vicinity already.
Right.
So they just have to drive a few more miles down the road and get off the freeway. And there they are, deep in the Molalla Forest. So that really didn't take very long. Excuse me. But he had kind of a little bit of a route that that he liked to use, and I think it becomes somewhat apparent as as the reader, delves into the book. But anyway, they drink their vodka and agree on their date, and they head to the Molalla Forest Road, and they turn off, they park, and at some point he tells her to get her, all of her clothes off, to get completely undressed, and she agrees, and she asks for the money first, but at some point, he brings bondage into the situation as he's looking at her, youthful naked body that he's obviously fantasizing, probably recalling something that he had done previously with someone else. And bondage gets brought up, and the feet thing, and he says that he actually tells her that that's the only way that he can do it, is if he ties her up, plays with her feet, and basically masturbates, and she says she feels like that she can handle that, and I guess it goes on from there. But when she got into the restraints, she started complaining that they were too tight, and he gets angry and tells her she agreed to do it, and so forth. It's almost like he was I don't know, he was no longer the nice guy. His personality was changing.
Yeah. And
she was becoming more and more scared. And but again, she was one of the lucky ones. And she complained and she fought with him, and he tells her to fight as much as she wants, and nobody will hear her in the forest. And then he goes on and starts talking about some woman that he knew before, Maureen, and it's definitely fantasy. If you, as you know from studying this kind of work, serial killers typically like to relive what they've done over and over and over, and
sure.
He apparently was reliving his experience with Tracy, using another victim, Maureen, and she comes into play later on in the book. It's not clear at this stage that that's who he's talking about, but it becomes clearer later on, I believe. And anyway, he gets violent with her. He starts biting her, biting her feet, I believe. And she screams at him and tells him it wasn't part of the deal, and that he needs to back off, basically. And he really put fear into her when he pulled a kitchen knife, out of his glove compartment, and he held it, next to her body. And but he threatened at that point he wanted to cut off her breasts, and she basically fought back and told him that there was no way that he was going to cut off her breasts. And I believe that her action of fighting back with him and trying to take control of the situation, at least as best she could, might have shocked him back into reality enough to where he was no longer either not in the mood to go through with what he had planned, or it had scared him out of being in the mood to carry on with what he had planned. But for whatever reason, her standing up to him caused him to back down, and he ended up, letting her go.
This is we don't want to. I don't want to underestimate how powerful this scene in your book is. How powerful it is for that woman. I was totally taken aback. This woman at some point figures, listen, I'm hoping I can get out of this. I've been optimistic so far. Maybe if I go along with this guy, because he's changed his personality radically to listen, bitch. Yeah. And he's got her hog-tied and face down, and he's not entering her nicely, and he's well endowed, and he's mean, and And it seems like he's reveling in any kind of pain and any kind of blood, the sight of blood. And so she's really afraid. And so we don't underestimate that fear. And then he says, listen, there's only two ways out of here. Either I'm going to cut both your breasts off, or I'm going to strangle you. And then she mustered up this, at least, because she couldn't move, she said, well, you're going to have to kill me. She yelled at him, you're going to have to kill me because you're not going to carve me up. And I was blown away on how powerful that was from this woman to be able to, crack this mind of this guy at that point. And it's very important. We'll talk about this point in time, how important that is, and her obvious being able to escape. So tell us now more about, she puts him in his place. How does it come that he thinks, geez, despite what I've done to her, despite what she's gone through and seen and witnessed, I can let her go? Tell us about that. Well,
it would really be just, supposition on my part more than anything. The fact is that he did let her go, whether it was out of fear or whether he felt sorry for her. I have no way of knowing what the reason was, other than of course, it has been 20 years since I wrote the book. It just seems like he lost his edge. He lost the edge that he had with his victim. And when he realized that, he just let her go. I mean, he probably at some point knew that his impending doom was, out there, that he would eventually get caught no matter what. He must have thought about it. But in this particular instance, why let go of a potential witness? It could be that he felt like that she just wouldn't tell, or that they would never make the connection. Because a lot of these girls never did tell the police until later. Yeah. Well, I mean, it seems that, and again, it might just be what I have inferred from it, is that any kind of previous attacks, we'll say, or this kind of behavior was never reported. It was reported among the women, but who, like you state in the book, these people aren't going to go because they likely have warrants, and that's why Tracy was hesitant too. Warrants. Police not caring much anyway, thinking it's just a date gone bad. So, again, that kind of information probably floats among the women themselves, too, to the point where there's no use. So you state in the book that he likely knew that as well. But what I found was fascinating was that I read more into it, that he lost his enjoyment right there. There was sort of an edge of fantasy and excitement, but it sort of got drained out of him. There was no more enjoyment at that point. Well, yeah, I believe that was true. Part of the thrill, part of the sexual thrill was his dominance over her. Right. And suddenly he had lost that. And that's like almost like sticking a pin in a balloon. I mean, it was just popped. He just, kind of lost where to go, because that was his modus operandi, and that's just the way he operated. He liked to do it that way, and that's the way he got off on committing his crimes. And suddenly, here was this woman who burst his bubble. Now, you would think that most people would go to the police. So she didn't go to the police. She must have told her. Did she tell her boyfriend? I mean, what about? She must have warned the other women. Tell us what happened after. Did. I'm trying to remember back. If she did go to the police, it was a little bit later, maybe. It wasn't initially, no. Yeah, I don't believe it was right away. No, no. I know Detective Turner did find out about her later, but I thought I knew this frontwards and backwards, but it has been 20 years, so. Yeah. Now, she bumps into a person that's known on the street, that's working the streets as well, a co-worker named Mo. And
while Mo is giving her some hard luck story, she tells Mo about her experience with Steve, and tell us about that conversation between the two.
Well, Mo basically, when she heard that Tracy had, had this encounter with Rogers, or Steve the Gambler, as he was known, she basically said that she wouldn't have anything to do with him anymore, and this had been, I don't know. Mo had gone out on a few dates with Rogers, and it becomes clear as you get into the book and with the interviews with the various prostitutes, but she just basically gave her a word of warning, to stay the hell away from him if she ever came, encountered him again. She recognized him as dangerous. Mo herself was not going to have anything else to do with him. But I don't know when her actions or when her business actually ended with Rogers. It must have been, when he killed her. I mean, it had to be her final. I mean, that's obvious, that was her final thing. But whether or not there were many encounters as opposed to just a few between Maureen and Rogers from the time that Maureen was finding out about what she was hearing on the streets, it's probably anybody's guess. I would just be, giving you conjecture at this point.
Yeah, what I found incredible is that Tracy doesn't really make the connection between Mo and Maureen, despite the name, till they have the conversation wherein Maureen warns Tracy, who, was already warned before by someone, maybe even somebody like Maureen who had told someone else. This is remarkable. So she rewarns Tracy and states her own experience of having gone on these dates with this freakazoid, and then she goes on more dates with the guy.
Yeah.
Even though she tells her, listen, if you even bump into the guy, call the cops if you have to. And then Maureen goes back on dates with this guy. Now, before we go any further, we introduced this, we've introduced this gentleman here, so maybe we can give us the background on this gentleman before we go any further.
You mean Rogers?
Yes, please.
Well, he had a very unusual background, unusual by my standards anyway. He was born in Moscow, Idaho, and that in itself is not so unusual, but his parents were, religious zealots and moved around a lot. At some point, I believe they even lived in chicken coops, wherever they could find shelter. But very, very strict parents. Dayton, I believe, had a sister. He had a thing about his sister's shoes, which the family tried to keep quiet. He was, basically a loner. Didn't have, too many friends growing up. None that I could find. There were. He fits your basic, I guess, profile of how so many of these other guys, Gacy, Bundy, all these guys, how they developed. Just that his time was perhaps shorter than some of the others. But his family life, and I'm hesitant to always try to put the blame off on how a child was raised. I mean, there have been horrendous parents in the world, and they don't all turn out to be, bad seed like that. But one can't help but wonder if the way he was brought up had something to do with it. He got involved in like minor or not really minor. I don't want to try to oversimplify anything that he ever did, but the crimes that he was involved in were less severe, early on than they became as he progressed through this. And by saying that, I mean that he had encounters with younger girls that got him in trouble with the cops, and it was usually just a hand-slapping type thing. He'd get arrested, and charged and released, and it was kind of sad in a way, because had they recognized early on the type of person that they were dealing with, Dayton may not have killed so many women. But unfortunately, that didn't happen, and we had this monster running around the Portland area for quite some time.
What were the relatively minor crimes? If we would hear about them, maybe we could see how they might be able to establish some sort of future pattern or future threat.
Well, there were encounters with younger girls whenever he was like a teenager, maybe a little bit older. And I don't want to go too far into his other crimes, because a lot of them were never adjudicated. And I just, kind of got to be a little bit careful with it. But
was there any warning signs that could have been foreseen? Sometimes some people don't seem to be recognized by the courts, where in hindsight they should have been. Was there any indication of that here? Some oversight,
When he stabbed the girl in Eugene, for instance, that was a perfect idea of oversight there. I mean, they should have seen that this guy, has this violent tendency, and why would he stab her, just and leave her in the woods and then go back later to try and save her? That was supposedly was his, girlfriend at the time, or somebody that he had thought of as possibly a girlfriend. But just the fact that you stabbed her out of nowhere, it came out of nowhere. That should have been a big clue right there. But it didn't. He was released, and life went on.
No, at what point does he get married and start assuming this real normal life? How young or is he?
I don't remember how old he was when he got married right off the top of my head, but he was actually married a couple of times, and his first wife actually came to see me at a book signing, and I didn't believe it was really her until she showed me a picture of her and Dayton at their wedding, and so he was married to this other woman for a while, and then he married his later wife during the time of the killing. And I don't know. I'm reluctant to name her name. She probably wants to get on with her life by now. But they had a child together, a boy, and Dayton was running a small engine repair shop out of a small town there south of Portland, and he was fairly successful at it. He made a decent living for his family, but he was living these two lives. He was going to work repairing small engines and then staying out late. Instead of coming home to his wife and child, he was out murdering prostitutes and making up excuses to his wife. So he was living a double life, to be sure.
And from all indications, he did really have this. He wasn't a loner, but had the facade of the marriage and the child. Was he this genuine, very much like Bundy, able to have this, as you described, this sort of a mask about him, this really duality?
Yeah, he had social skills, and there's no doubt about it. He knew when to pour on the charm and when not to. He may not have been quite as adept as Bundy, in that regard, but the ability was there.
Now, was amazingly that Tracy Baxter doesn't go to the police. Police never hear about, or do not hear about this report till much later, or know about her at all. Mo disappears at some point. There's a 6-month period. Tell us about that period in Portland. What was going on? And tell us what happened in that 6 months.
Well, can you be a little bit more specific about the 6-month period? It's not making...
Well, after Tracy didn't report anything to police, then later, we alluded to it in the introduction about the hunter accidentally finding the bodies, but what happens with the investigation itself into these women disappearing?
Well, they're basically documenting the disappearances, and they're taking reports from, potential witnesses, and they've talked to a number of these women, and they're beginning to, see similarities, see certain things that are standing out, but nothing real definitive yet. And really, I don't think they would have known about Rogers for quite some time if he hadn't screwed up on his final kill. But I'm not quite sure where you're trying to go with that, other than...
maybe that's the amount of months wrong, but I know that the obviously there's a probe, a force that's looking at this. At the same time, you talk about in your book that the reason why, Rogers was very careful till Tracy Baxter. And then he felt, I don't think, he was pretty confident she wasn't going to go to the police. He wasn't that worried. He didn't really change what he was doing. So at some point, we alluded to that he finally makes a mistake. He's very careful, though, before that. There are no bodies. There's no evidence because there's no one showing up. So tell us what happens. How does everything all change? What happens to our perpetrator here that somehow he is not careful anymore?
Well, basically, we have a number of women who are disappearing, one by one off of Portland streets over a period of months. And a killer who's obviously out there, but we have no bodies yet to prove murder. So he's obviously getting away with what he likes to do, and he's probably building up a lot of confidence in doing it. And this went on for some time. And, and when there would be the occasional case that would come in where the police would interview someone, something might ring a bell, similarity, a name, a place or whatever, but it was never enough to make the determination that there was something actually actively going on. Not until Everett Banyard, the hunter, stumbled upon Dayton's cluster dump in the Molalla Forest. Once he stumbled upon those bodies and reported it to the Clackamas County Sheriff's Department, that's when the case really broke wide open, and that would have been, beginning of the end for Rogers. By the time that the cops actually get up there, and this was one of the reasons why I wrote the book in the manner that I did. It was too hard to put it together in a dramatic fashion in strictly chronological order, but I tried to do that by showing the final kill, that of Jennifer Lisa Smith at the Denny's restaurant, by showing that first in detail, because it clearly showed Rogers in action. It showed what he liked to do. It had eyewitnesses who saw him doing it, and he fled the scene and basically escaped for a short time until the cops tracked him down in the wee hours of the morning at his shop, south of Portland. Then, of course, course, the bigger break comes a little bit later. I don't know if you want to get into that yet or not.
Sure, just proceed from there. Basically, what I wanted to do is establish, I mean, to me it's remarkable why anybody would jump in a vehicle as a I understand prostitution, but I didn't understand this element of it. I didn't understand, so I wanted to introduce somebody that survived, and then you would think, oh, now the police will know. No, still the police don't know. So
no.
So tell us more about the discovery, and what do police do right from there? How do they proceed?
Well, the cops have been getting these reports all along of this guy who liked to, be rough with his dates and so forth. And there was one recurring theme that seemed to be among them, and that was that he always liked to drink vodka and orange juice, vodka being in the small airline bottles and the orange juice being from those types bought at the convenience stores. And it wasn't until after Jenny Smith was murdered in front of dining patrons at the Denny's restaurant in Milwaukee, Oregon, that Rogers was arrested, of course, and they had that one murder on him right then and there, but that's all they knew at that point. But then there comes Everett Banyard, the hunter, and he reports finding these bodies up in the Molalla Forest. So John Turner and Jim Strovink and different ones from the Clackamas County Sheriff's Department head up there and find them, designated as a crime scene. They basically, do the whole operation the way it's supposed to be done. And at one point, they encountered orange juice bottles and the small miniature vodka bottles that had been dropped off near one of the bodies. And that was the clue, the one single thing that put in Detective Turner's mind that Dayton Rogers was behind these killings. And it was mainly because of I'm having trouble remembering exactly how he put this together. You read the book recently. I haven't, but there was something that I should know this, but God, it's been so long. There had something to do with the alcohol and orange juice. I thought with Jenny Smith too, but maybe not.
I'm thinking of what you're referring to, but
yeah, I probably got off on a tangent that I shouldn't have there.
No. I wanted to know what was the police? What was their idea in terms of the timeline in that cluster dump that he did have there? What did the police initially look at and say this? Did they think it was a large expanse of time or a shorter expanse of time in terms of how the victims got there and how long had been there since they had been there?
Well, it wasn't a long time. It was less than 2 years, if memory serves me correctly.
Mm-hmm.
You had to look at the dates of the victims that they were finding up there when they disappeared. But it was overall a fairly short period of time, but one that could have went on and on and on had it not been for Dayton's carelessness with the vodka bottles. But I think I just remembered where Turner had seen the vodka bottles, and it had been when they impounded his pickup truck the morning of the arrest after Jenny Smith's, and that's what had caused to ring the bell when they found the debris or the garbage in the forest near the bodies. But
tell us a little bit about Detective John Turner in terms of who he was before this definitely changed his life for a couple of years.
He's a great detective. He's not somebody you want on your ass.
No.
John and I developed a great relationship over a period that I was writing this book, and even before and after that, we'd known each other because of my days of writing for True Detective. So he had kind of an open door policy with me. I'd drop by and we'd talk, and if he had something, I'd research it. But when I put this on him, he decided that he had to take this to the sheriff and find out if they could cooperate, and so they did. The sheriff was very happy to be able to have this case 100% highlighted in such a positive manner for their department, because they really did do an outstanding job on solving it. And so I get this phone call one day from John. It says, "You need to meet me downtown. We're going to make this easy as possible," he said. "You need to meet me downtown in a parking garage." So I'm thinking, wow, okay, Woodward and Bernstein, deep throat type stuff. So anyway, we go to the parking garage, and I pull up next to his car, and he basically unloads all copies of the case files. You know, and from his car into mine, there's like 6 boxes. He says, "Take them, study them, give them back when you're done. But any questions in the meantime, just call me." And that's how I had such good information, for number one, on how the case was handled, and number two, that information enabled me to go and talk with people in person, because I could track them down. I was basically dealing with the same thing that the cops were dealing with.
Yeah, it was amazing the access you had, and that information is just invaluable, really, to this story.
Yeah, but, you know, I have the utmost respect for John Turner. I think he might be retired now. I've kind of lost track of what's going on up there. Been away so long, but they all did a great work on the case.
Well, it seems to be hard to fathom for some people, but not every officer goes into this without a certain amount of bias. So we hear constantly how less valued the prostitute's story is, or the prostitute is in terms of a victim. Certainly, it seems it's not just the police. I'm saying in terms of society in general, media, the public, and oftentimes police are just in that small, group of people that could care less. But this person was not. That's not what he was made of.
No, he actually cared for the victims, and I think, by and large, we get this perception that a lot of cops really don't care, if they're from the lower dregs of society or whatever. Something happens to them, it's their fault, they deserved it or whatever. Sure, you've got a number of people who have that attitude, but I believe for the most part that, and you almost have to believe this in my line of work, and as far as just being human, I guess, we have to believe that they care, about what they're doing, at least to some degree. And John definitely demonstrated, that he cared about the victims.
Well, more importantly, too, if you, and he had outrage. That's what you put in the book too. That he had a certain level of outrage, and so these kinds of people are hell bent on catching the criminals. So as much as they care about the victims, of course, because they deal with the families. So how could you not be sympathetic? Because there's families involved. But it's their job, the dirty job, to get these guys, to elicit the confessions, to get all the necessary evidence, and live with these cases till completion. So I find homicide detectives are not, obviously, are a lot more evolved than the general cop on the beat.
Yeah.
Might have a bad misrepresentation of a young cop that's a little still naive, but the homicide detective is not a guy that just started off. So
that's true. Yeah, very true. Yeah. But,
now, how do they come? Sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead. You go ahead. We're running out of time, I think.
Now, what happens with police now that they have this murder witness and also this other mounting evidence? What is the police interview like with Rogers?
Well, of course there were several, but the main interviews before he, lawyered up and wouldn't talk to him at all was, Dayton, we have this evidence, your car was seen at the scene of the crime. You have a witness that showed you stabbing a victim. We even have the knife. We have your vehicle. It was warm, to the touch. You're saying you didn't drive it, and so on and so forth. He has cuts on his fingers, defensive wounds, evidently. They know they've got him red-handed. They know they have someone red-handed, at least for Jenny Smith, and so at first they're not polite at all, and they basically accuse him of this and accuse him of that, and of course it's all related to Jenny Smith during the first encounters, and then later on he lawyers up and he doesn't speak to anybody, and that was pretty much the end of that, other than what was in the official police reports. He never really.
So the evidence that they have against him is a lot more than circumstantial. At that time, DNA is not. Tell us about the state of DNA at that time.
Well, that would have been in the mid to late 80s when the crimes were being committed, and DNA was still in its very early stages.
Yeah.
And they were beginning to work with it and use it as a tool, but I don't believe that there was much done as far as DNA is concerned with this particular case, unless I could be mistaken. I just don't recall it right now. It doesn't make sense that they because they just weren't using it then. But
so how do they? What is the case that they put together with what is the evidence that they do have? How strong a case can they put together on him? Of course, he has a good lawyer. Tell us what they do have on him in terms of evidence.
Well, they had a lot of fiber evidence. They had hair. They had blood typing. Much of it came from inside the truck itself. The underneath the floor, was basically just soaked with blood, and a lot of it would have been really great DNA evidence had that been available to them at the time. But
right.
Instead, it was mainly blood typing, hair, fiber. Him maybe being seen in the vicinity of somewhere. The orange juice. A lot of it was circumstantial, of course, but they built as good a case as I guess they could have built against him based on what they had. And as you probably know from reading the book, it went through the system, 2 or 3 times, and he's still on death row. He hasn't been put to death. Chances are he probably won't be in Oregon. But they had a decent case against him. As I
At
recall,
what point do police, and what circumstances do police speak with Tracy Baxter?
That came out, and for me, that came out a little bit later on, and it prompted me to give her a fictitious name and so forth. But it came out during the interviews with the prostitutes, and there's a section in the book that kind of deals with that, but I don't, go into great detail with it. There's just too much, other info to use instead, but I used enough of it to where it would give the reader a good idea of what kind of information that the police, were receiving and what kinds of details that the prostitutes were providing them, because the interviews were quite detailed and interesting, and that's where I found, Tracy's statement.
What is the evidence of we talked about in the beginning, which is this guy is quite unique. I mean, serial killers very often share a lot of characteristics. So this guy, of course, shares many of those characteristics, but has some unique features too. This mutilation while people are alive, whereas a lot of them might mutilate afterwards. Tell us what evidence they did get from the prostitutes themselves in terms of what this Rogers was like and likely did to his victims.
Well, he enjoyed torturing them. I mean, that was very clear. He would bite them on their feet, the bottoms of their feet, and other parts of their body to the point, where they would bleed, and cause them tremendous pain. He would cut the heels of their feet, with a knife. there was evidence that he eviscerated one of his victims with a machete. He basically, shoved it into her vagina and then cut her from there all the way up to the sternum, presumably while she was alive and conscious, or at least for a moment or two. And he enjoyed sawing their feet off. He would take a hacksaw, and this was more theory than proof, but there was evidence shown that in two or three of his victims, he would take a hacksaw and cut their ankles, like a halfway or 2/3 of the way through, to elicit more pain, to cause more pain, to elicit a better pain response to something that he would enjoy. And when they would go into shock and basically not provide any show for him, I guess, for lack of a better word, he would then break the bone the rest of the way to try and, elicit additional response. So there were many indicators, including witness testimony, that he thoroughly enjoyed torturing his victims. And he definitely had a bloodlust, or a lust for blood.
And what was his idea about the cluster dump? And when police believe that there may be other victims, again, what's their idea that there may be other victims?
Well, there was one victim that went unidentified for a number of years. Victim number 7, I believe, or maybe it was 8. I can't recall for sure. She was recently identified and attributed to him. She was one of those found in the forest. Now, what was Rogers' idea? One can only guess that he hoped to elude detection by cluster dumping the bodies up there in the middle of this forest. I mean, it's really creepy. If you've ever been up there, you would know exactly what I was talking about, because there's nothing there, in the middle of a massive, dark, wet forest with forest sounds and nobody around for miles. I mean, it's a perfect opportunity to get rid of a body. And he evidently thought that it would buy him more time, by placing them there. He just never thought Everett Banyard would come wandering through there one day. But
was he careless with the cluster dump itself at some point, or how was? I'm sorry if I didn't understand exactly how this hunter found something that, he took a lot of effort to be able to do this. So how did the hunter actually stumble across that?
I think the hunter just, got lucky. I mean, you should call that luck. But he, to me, when I viewed a lot of the pictures that were taken from up there, it looked to me like he was careless. It didn't seem like any extra care had been made to, cover the bodies or whatever. He just find a place that, toss the body out here. It's not going to be found for a long time. And I think that must have been a certain amount of his thinking. I mean, one can only guess. But what
do you attribute him being so careful for so long, and then in the last instance with Jenny Smith, what was in public, in a crowded, what happened? Was it this is descent into, as we see sometimes with serial killers, where they are quite organized? Even Jeffrey Dahmer was quite organized and careful, but then wasn't. What do you attribute it to?
I think he lost a certain amount of the control that he was having over Jenny, and I think a certain amount of it was panic. I think a part of it might have been the build-up phase, where he's building up to the excitement, and I think he got a little bit too bold by using this parking lot of a Denny's restaurant. It's a very dark parking lot, I should say, where it's located. At that time of the early morning, it would be difficult for someone to easily see him. But in this case, it was made easier to be seen because of Jenny's screaming. And then once, of course, a person has been able to eyeball the source of the screaming, they can see that there's a naked woman out there, partially bound, covered in blood, and this guy's, hovering over her, stabbing her. But I think that part of the excitement or the build-up, it got to him, and he couldn't hold back, couldn't wait, caused him to become careless. And then, of course, you had Jenny, trying to escape. That threw him into a panic situation.
Yeah.
And once he panicked, witnesses had seen him, and one person chased him, got his license number. It was really basically all over, just a matter of time before everything was put together.
Now, sometimes cases like this warrant, I guess, a good response from the public or interest from abroad, from international media. But sometimes when the story is particularly shocking, sometimes even the media kind of gets a little gun-shy. What was the media and the public response to this trial?
As I recall, the media, was all over it for, months. And the public's response was, one of typical, shock and, oh my God, I can't